Welcome to Next Round with me, Dale McDermott.
And me, David W. Higgins.
A young Irish look at the economy, politics and society.
Covering home and abroad.
For the thinkers, the dreamers and the doers, this is Next Round. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Next Round. On today's episode, new data from the CSO says that new homes built to the end of Q3 of this year is down on the same period of last year. So less homes than expected. We want to actually talk about that in a bit more detail. The US election is also less than 2 weeks away, which is really hard to believe, and it is on a knife edge. With all eyes on the key swing states and with Donald Trump gaining momentum, could he pull off a win? So we want to look at that. And also then closer to home, with the Irish election now confirmed to be taking place this year, either at the end of November or start of December. We take a look at what a campaign might look like and some of the twists and turns that can happen, and especially looking back at 2020 where there were a few as well. So all of that is on today's show. If you do like this podcast, please like, share and subscribe to us. We are available on all major podcast platforms and also, of course, available on YouTube where you can watch our show, and our channel is there for you to subscribe. David, good to see you. I think let's maybe look afar. First of all, let's go to the US where we're less than 2 weeks out from the election. It is on a knife edge, but we are seeing one theme starting to emerge here where Donald Trump is gaining momentum. And what we have seen as well in the final monthly poll for the FT and the University of Michigan Ross School of Business, we've seen Donald Trump overtake Kamala Harris as the candidate that Americans trust on the economy, according to the latest poll from there. And of course, these findings come less than 2 weeks out from the election, and it marks the first time that Trump has actually led Harris in a poll like this on the economy. We also see as well in some of the key swing states as well, there has been momentum gaining in Wisconsin, in Nevada, in Michigan, and also crucially in Pennsylvania. We're seeing momentum moving towards the Republicans and towards Donald Trump. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and it's not long to go.
Yeah, it's not looking great for Harris on those movements. Now, those movements could always go back the other way. The thing that I look at, so when you pull together all the swing states and you plug them into a model, which there's a couple of people out there who do, what's the probability? So probability is where if you do a simulation 100 times, how many times out of those 100 does either Trump or Harris win? And Nate Silver, who kind of has, I say Silver has the gold standard of these kind of models, but his model has Trump with a 54% probability over Harris at 46.
Wow.
He used to work with a place called 538. Theirs is 52.48, which is really close. And there's some other models out there, Race to the White House, 270 to win, both showing kind of 51 to Trump, but one of the others showing 51 to Harris. So it's an incredibly close race. Maybe just to put some of that in context, go back to 2016, which Trump won. The probabilities back then were basically 2/3 towards Hillary over Trump. And then go back to 2020, they were even more firmly in favor of a Biden win, but they did actually correctly call that.
And even
so these
even in 2016, yeah. I think in the very final week of the campaign, most polling I think had Clinton over 90% chance of winning. But I think you rightly called out Silver, because Silver was actually one of the few pundits and pollsters who actually put a bit of a warning sign on that. And I think at the final week of the campaign, if I recall correctly, he thought that Clinton had probably had it, but he did say, warning sign here, I actually don't think it's as close as everyone, or as sewn up as everyone thinks it is. And actually,
Yeah,
Trump is
yeah,
doing better than everyone is saying he's doing.
yeah, and despite him still being on the side of Hillary winning, his was closer. You're
Yeah.
right. Many were in the kind of 90% plus. It's a certain thing. Hillary has it, and then his had more caution. And these things aren't subjective. There isn't a thing whereby people put caution into their models. What they're doing is they're trying to best place averages on the polls that were out there and put weights on polls that are more reliable. So you're trying to find the pollsters that have a better track record, ones that mightn't have a bit of a political bias to them, as most pollsters in the US don't, but some do. And that process is getting refined and refined all the time.
Yeah.
But the thing that's emerged in this election cycle is that pollsters are having real difficulty talking to MAGA Republicans, because a lot of MAGA Republicans see pollsters as being part of the establishment, and they see it as being, no, I'm not going to talk to these guys. And the pollsters are having trouble there. So it's quite possible that Trump could even be understated on that front. Now, there's also the flip side, which says that people are sick of Trump. Kamala's new. She has that kind of wave behind her, going back to her selection over the summer, and that can ride her into a more decisive victory. But even with this knife edge, there's quite a risk that the Electoral College comes through with quite a degree of uncertainty. And you could even have a repeat of the 2000 election where you ended up in the Supreme Court.
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, it's like, just for listeners and viewers, guidance on here. Like, this is extremely close. So if we look at, again, some of the key states here. So let's say Pennsylvania, Trump at 48.3, Harris 47.7. Wisconsin, 48.2 for Trump, 40% for Harris. Michigan, 47.
Just say those are just the percentage vote,
Yes.
as opposed to percentage probability.
Correct.
Right?
Yes,
What I've been
that's
talking
right.
about is you flip a coin, but yours is the actual vote percent.
Actual vote percentage, yeah, because I just want to demonstrate how close this is in terms of the knife edge. Michigan, 47.9 for Trump, Harris, 47.7. So, there's two thoughts in my mind here. One is this is extremely close, and this could really go either way. As we've seen before in 2020 and 2016, it was really, three states there or thereabouts that actually decided this, and about 70,000 to 40,000 votes in those three states going either way can make the president or not.
Dale, of course, you and I were in the US in 2016.
We were in New York, which God, that was the atmosphere in New York on that day in Manhattan, and in that evening, it just changed so suddenly.
Yeah, I think the joke went, though, that the next morning people on the subway had their heads down, not talking to anyone, and people did joke, well, no, sorry, that is just a normal morning on the subway system in New York.
Yeah.
But I went down to Philadelphia during that week that we were
That's right.
there, and I went to Clinton's last rally, and I queued for a number of hours to get into it. And you had John Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen were amongst the lineup that included the Clintons, the Obamas, both couples, Joe Biden. Like it was kind of the star-studded every member of the cast of the Democratic Party. I'm seeing a similar playbook getting rolled out here. I'm waking up this morning to news of, Bruce Springsteen has done a rally, and he's saying that Trump is, a stark danger to democracy in America and all that kind of stuff. And look, I haven't seen the full thing, so maybe he says some great things about Kamala as well.
I think Beyonce today as well confirmed she's endorsed Kamala as well, I believe.
Oh, very good.
Eminem was in Detroit as well, in a stump speech as well earlier on this week too, supporting Harris.
Yeah. Though that's good. All these artists have decent support bases, where Taylor Swift fans are known as Swifties, Beyonce's fans are known as the Bay Hive, which I only learned this year. That's how kind of
I should know that, by the way, and I don't, but there you go.
Yeah. Don't come to me for pop culture.
Me too.
I'm average at best.
Yeah.
But the problem I have with all this, right, is that this looks like it's a much more negative set of messaging coming from the
Yeah.
Democrats as we go into this vote. And the US public have heard this before. They've heard it in 16. Trump is going to be a disaster. And Trump had some bad things that he did and ways that he underperformed. But the worst scenario of the Trump presidency did not emerge. And the problem is that when you have an even older Trump and quite a more tired character at this point, is a second Trump presidency going to be what the Democrats are saying it's going to be? And this is where I think there's a mismatch in the messaging. And I don't think it's the right messaging.
No, it's
People
not.
should be told why vote for Kamala.
Agreed. I agree with you, David. I think, and I've noticed this as well, and it kind of plays into their messaging, right? Which is, you know, the media is against us, the establishment is against us, is against us, the Hollywood elite are against us, right? I don't think rolling out what are in effect multi-millionaires to tell average people how to vote, that doesn't exactly work in terms of kind of the messaging that they want to do. And I think as well, your point about negative campaigning, vote for me because that guy's bad, that doesn't cut it either, I think, in the US. And I think crucially, as we led here, which is actually on the economy, we've seen Donald Trump overtake Kamala Harris on being the preferred candidate to lead with the economy. And we know Americans vote with their pocket. So it's
if I was to ask you, Dale, who do you think is going to do it in 2 weeks' time? Who would you say?
I'm going to say Donald Trump.
And Trump's my answer as well.
And I didn't think it would happen, to be honest. But I thought from the get-go, I didn't think picking Harris was the best move. And I'll say this, like, there's a reason why she lost in 2016. In the primaries. In the primaries. There's a reason why she wasn't picked in 2020. She was sidelined effectively for most of the Biden presidency. And I don't think the campaign has gone well. We've seen, one thing I've noticed with Trump is he's out there doing interviews. He's on all these different podcasts, which I think is actually a really smart way to try connect with younger people. And they're long form as well, right? It's not just snippets for 15 minutes. Like, these are an hour or two, right? And it's moving and oscillating between so many different topics, right? And I think that level of authenticity plays well in modern forms of campaigning. Like, I think if you look back to Obama in 2008, he mastered social media. Well, I think this form of communicating with people in terms of long form podcasts and, not being as polished and making mistakes, like, I think that actually really resonates well with voters. And I just don't think the Harris campaign has been able to emulate that as best as they probably should. Now, I'm not saying that that's, the be all and end all, but it is a form of campaigning that I think is working and is quite effective in messaging.
Yeah, I think Trump is probably going to emerge as the victor in this as well. People will say it's a surprise. Well, when things are as close as this, actually,
it's not.
No, that's to be expected.
Yeah.
And then also, given what you said about the economy, but also given that this feels like the late 70s playbook, where you have a wave of inflation and a Democrat becomes a one-term president, which is what Biden is. But I'm trying to think ahead to what a Trump presidency might look like. And just the things to put on people's radar is that the US has quite a wide budget deficit, and things are rosy in the US economy now. Your full employment, stock market is high. But if there's any sort of bump in that, it's going to be a real test of how Donald Trump deals with that. Now, he also led the US through the first year of COVID, and a lot of parts of the US economy kind of went into automatic mode. You had the Fed pumping money and cutting interest rates. Congress came along and passed a lot of stimulus, and Trump kind of just said, "Yeah, great, let's do that." But a world where the US economy slows down and where its debt levels become more salient as a problem. That's a real challenge for Trump, because Trump has a much more tax cut heavy plan than Kamala. You would normally think the Democrats are going to be the ones who blow out the budget. Actually, Trump is the one who is at risk of doing that. And he may find that his agenda has to be curtailed mid-office, which he may not care about doing because he doesn't have re-election to care about. But whether the US will emerge in 4 years' time from a second Trump presidency in a stronger economic position is actually just not so clear.
Yeah, and I think as well the piece that will be the case with a second Trump presidency is volatility. I mean, this is a guy who's going to put tariffs left, right, and center. He's going to start trade wars once again. As you mentioned, there will be a large tax cutting agenda from a Trump administration. And that coupled with, of course, some of the social elements that he's looking to do, the tackling immigration and what that might look like and how that fares out, I think. So I think it's going to be an abrasive presidency if it does go forward, and it's going to be quite uncertain. And maybe that's not the best thing for markets to have to contend with, because I think he's very unpredictable. I mean, even for his staff, he's very unpredictable, right? So it's going to be interesting. But you're saying, and then in terms of how close you think it'll be, do you think? I was thinking 271 EVs to 268, or do you think it'll be over 300?
I'd say more in the twos than the threes. Because I mean, Trump always loses the popular vote.
He does,
for example. So you're talking about a number of small states to just notch in his favor. But there was no qualms in 2016 from the Clinton side about the victory, because the Democrats do trust the system. So actually, any sort of certainty around a Trump victory, even if it's marginal, actually quells some of the market fear initially. Because people say, oh, great, the worst scenario of having a very uncertain number of months and up to the Supreme Court, that will be off the table, you'd expect.
One narrative, David, that I want to actually just chat about is you constantly hear this narrative that the Electoral College is a stupid system, it's unfair, and really it should be just the kind of the popular vote. And I'm curious, I wonder what you think about that, because we see it as a small country in Europe. And as a small country in Europe, if we were to not have any sort of protections for smaller countries' voices and representation, let's say at the European Council or various other major mechanisms in the European Union, a country like Ireland will be just ruled over. And then the question would be, well, why are we even in this institution if our voice is not being heard? And I think if you translate that narrative then to the US context, the same thing applies here. If we were to just go by the popular vote, California and New York would decide federal politics for eternity. And I think for a country like the US, that is really, it's 50 countries in one, effectively. That's a narrative that I hear being pushed out time and time again. And I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's effective, because it isn't reflective of the reality of, again, the voice of smaller states, which makes America as powerful as it is.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, the US has, the Senate, which gives an equal number of seats per state within the House, where it is proportional. So they have a mix there. The presidency then is this question of whether you go for those one of those two models. I actually think you could move to popular vote, but you would still have the protection of the Senate, which would give people that say there. But yeah, you would end up then with a more heavy kind of coastal, let's say, influence on the presidency. And actually, then you may always have a Democrat type kind of getting in all the time. So you can understand why they have that system. It also kind of stems back to how isolated some parts of the US used to be geographically in an age before the internet and modern technology,
That's right,
whereby you have this long period of time between the vote itself in November, the meeting of the Electoral College, and the inauguration. And that stems back to the days where you had to travel for miles and miles without the days of motor cars or airplanes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So, look, it's going to be interesting. Again, we have 11 days to go here, and that a lot can happen. For example, speaking of
Yeah.
podcasts, I think Donald Trump is actually on Joe Rogan podcast later on today, so I'll be curious to know how that goes. Or if
Whether he smokes weed on it,
like Musk, I know. So we'll see how that goes. But that said, let's move from the US and let's go closer to home. And actually, let's talk about homes, because the new number of dwellings completed to the end of September this year has been less than the number of homes completed in the same period for last year. And that's with new data released from the CSO, which shows that for July to September of this year, around 8,939 new homes were completed, which is an increase of 6.3% on the same 3 months for 2023. However, the first and second quarter of this year were both down on the same periods last year. So that's resulting in the total output of new homes at 21,664 compared to 22,335 for the first 9 months of 2023. So down is the narrative there. And of course, this comes after the Minister for Housing, Darragh O'Brien, estimating earlier this year that around 40,000 homes would be completed this year. And of course, it is calculated that 70,000 homes are going to be needed per year to reduce both the housing deficit and to meet demand over the next decade. Now, we have seen as well some, and David, we've mentioned this a few times on this podcast around kind of the targets that are being set. We originally saw parties saying, we need 30,000, 40,000. I've seen Fine Gael now more recently say we need 60,000, and same with Fianna Fáil, we need upwards of 50 or 60,000. But it's a bit of a mixed message here in terms of what's actually being said and what's being delivered.
Yeah. So what's interesting about the numbers is that, okay, year to date, we're down year on year, but actually within this quarterly release of Q3, it's up 6% on the same quarter last year. But even taking all of that kind of mix of two signals, Q4 needs to be huge to meet the target. Yeah. Now, Q4, which is still to come, tends to be the largest quarter for housing completions. So even though it's only one quarter of the year, 25%, it typically accounts for somewhere between 30 and 35% of completions. So there should be a jump from that 8,900, probably above 10,000. We did 10,000 in Q4 of last year, 9 the previous before, and 7 back in 21. Mm-hmm. So that's been stepping up. We have big Q4s, but we're having even bigger Q4s. So maybe we get 11 or 12,000 in, something like that, which probably might take you ahead of where we might actually catch up on that difference on being behind year to date. But just the reason I think that this is happening. Yeah. So these are the numbers for completions, right? A house that is connected up to the ESB network, and a person is presumably therefore going in to live in it. But prior to houses being completed, they need to start construction. That's also a metric that is measured. So when you look at commencements, which is the build, kind of putting tools on the ground to actually
shovel in the ground.
Shovel in the ground. Yeah. That number. So for 20 years, 21, 22, and 23, we were hovering around 20,000 commencements in each of those years. 20,000, mm-hmm. right? Not 30 or 40 like the targets. Mm-hmm. But in 2024, in the Jan to August period, where we have data for that, we had 37,000 homes commenced. Yeah, 37,000. So there has been quite a jump up in the commencements. So even if we have an underwhelming Q4 after this underwhelming Q3 and year-to-date number, into next year and beyond, when those homes that started this year begin to get completed next year and after, it looks like there's going to be a sizable step up in those completion numbers.
Yeah. Which is, and again, that speaks to the momentum. And look, this is I think what we have to remember is, of course, this is going from a situation in 2014 where we effectively had a couple of thousand of commencements every year. So now it's still half of what the agreed rate is for us to actually meet both the deficit and demand, which is forecast over the next decade. And I think that question then, David, is can the commencement rate that we have now, can we double that effectively?
Well, we did. We doubled it this year, almost, not exclusively double, but going from in the 20,000s to closer to 40,000 on commencements is quite the step
It
up.
is.
And
But still short.
You're still short, yeah. But I wouldn't underestimate what that includes.
Yeah.
That includes planning permission having been granted.
Yeah.
It includes builders getting the project together and having the people ready to commence it, and that's a significant step. What also is a factor in this. This was highlighted, I think, by one of the kind of investment houses in Dublin. One of their researchers looked at this and they said, well, because we have a larger share of apartments in the pipeline, apartments take longer to complete. So yes, you're commencing a lot of stuff, but because it's more urban, more apartment heavy, you will also have a further delay in getting that stuff completed. So it might be more firmly into 2026 before you begin to see a lot of those projects finished. But what gets started, tends to get completed and finished.
Yeah.
The problem that we have further back in the planning, the whole process, is that when you have planning permissions, if you grant 50,000 planning permissions, maybe only 25,000 of those, let's say, only half of them might get done, and that's down to how you might get granted permission, but then you might not have the people to put shovel in the ground.
Yeah, and then you funding as well, and also. Yeah, that might be just change of plans, etc. So it's and of course all of that. So that 37,000 figure, David, that's also within the old framework. Of course, the new planning bill has just passed both the Dáil and Seanad and was signed by the president last week. And hopefully with this new planning bill and this new planning regulation framework, that'll actually be a facilitator for even more commencements.
Yeah, you'd hope so. I mean, the types of development...
That'll be the test, right?
It will. The types of development that were ending up in the High Court under the old planning system, and that added a lot of cost to projects, were typically more kind of apartment and larger block developments. When you were going off to build a sprawling housing estate of 3-bed semis, there weren't as much objections to begin with. And there was a fast track system that typically worked a bit better for those developments over the apartments. The question is now, will we still have a good pace of apartments in the pipeline? Because developers are finding that apartments are increasingly expensive to build. They always were expensive, but they're even more expensive now. Most of them are being built to be rented out, not to be purchased. In fact, the numbers of apartments to be purchased in Ireland actually has gone down over the years because it's just such a light market for that. People tend to want to buy homes, but to rent apartments. And a lot of this will depend on some of the population forecasts, what the Irish economy does. I think apartments will be the first thing to go if there's a slowdown, because that's where the kind of the new incremental demand has been coming from, has been a lot of more tech jobs, more finance jobs in our urban centres, and that's been adding a lot of the rental pressures.
Yeah, and of course that huge concentration of where apartments are located. So let's say for Q3 of this year, almost 80% of apartment completions were in Dublin, and just shy of 95% of those were actually within Dublin City as well. So again, it shows the apartment form of dwelling completions heavily concentrated within Dublin.
Yeah, and that's over the decades we've been bad at building in Dublin. We've sprawled a lot outside of Dublin, and that's given people longer commutes and all of that, and building a bit more densely. So there is now density requirements within our planning, and that was there before this planning bill. But I occasionally hear stories now of where someone wants to build apartments, and they're actually told to make it more dense. to come along and actually put more units within the same space. And that's quite an encouraging thing to see. I mean, we occasionally talk about things like, okay, you can't build big high rises in Dublin. And that is also true. We're kind of truncated on each side in a way, but that's good. You have a floor for density and you have a ceiling too, which isn't great, but having a floor is actually quite important.
Yeah, it is. No, that's an important framework again, just to spur that that type of density within the city.
Yeah.
With that,
all this stuff,
yeah,
all this stuff might not. I know what we're going to talk about next, but this might not move the election, right? So if these are the numbers are the last numbers to come out before the election, and the last thing the government wants is to see that their completion numbers are not where they'd like them to be.
yeah, and look, but again, I think to your point, David, like the last quarter is going to be the big bumper where lots of where the numbers should be increased. So I think it's an easy one to bat off if that does come out in the campaign. But the campaign has been confirmed for 2024. So for this year, and it's targeting end of November, start of December, with a date to be confirmed. But effectively, that means that the campaign is actually in earnest started. And I know, David, one thing we want to talk about is, what might this campaign look like? Because I think as much as we can try and plan out and think about what is predicted, all we have to do is look back at 2020 to know that events of the week and of the day can actually dictate how a campaign goes.
Absolutely. So I've done a day by day on this because you'll know I love spreadsheets.
I do.
And I did this back in 2020. And I wanted to see how does a campaign unfold as the days go by. So just to give you a sense of, I'll talk about the 29th of November as being this election. And then it was February 8th that we voted in 2020. But actually, I'm going to talk about where we are now, which is 5 weeks out from polling. And let's go back to 5 weeks out from the 2020 polling. In that 5 weeks to go, people might remember a thing called the RIC controversy, the Royal Irish Constabulary, and that was an event that was going to be held to mark a centenary around what was the old police force under British rule at the time, and it was deeply, deeply controversial. And I would credit some of that as being a few notches off the government parties during that. Then when you got to...
Because they were on the back foot, and then I think there was no kind of single line on it, and you'd some ministers saying one thing, others saying the other. I know Charlie Flanagan at the time came out quite strongly kind of in favour of participation in the RIC event, and big backlash. Yeah,
big backlash. And that really kind of, back from the start. I think it was Noel Rock, TD, who was one of the voices to say, look, guys, we need to just not do this event.
Let's just
and the event was stopped, actually. Then you get into 4 weeks to go, and there was speculation around the date and everything. We knew this one was coming. It just had to be held then. This one's a little different because we're speculating on a little bit of an earlier one. But anyway, the campaign gets started kind of with 3 or 4 weeks to go. And the day after the start of the campaign, a homeless man is injured on the canals in the constituency of Dublin Bay South, which is the constituency of the then housing minister, Owen Murphy. And the optics of this are terrible. So the homeless man was injured by machinery that was trying to clear parts of the canal. I think
they were clearing tents, kind of house. They were clearing tents from the canal, right?
Yeah, and they cleared a tent that they presumed was empty, and there was actually a homeless man inside the tent. But the optics were that Owen Murphy's poster is overlooking this whole site. So you've got the face of the man who was perceived as having not delivered on housing, overlooking a scene of a homeless man, and the presumption was, well, that man shouldn't have been there. He should have been housed. So you end up with the start of a campaign that again puts the government further on the back foot, and the campaign begins to be dominated by housing, but also health. And in the earlier stages of the campaign, you have some live TV debates. And it was Claire Byrne Live did a debate on health, just on health, that topic, with spokespersons. And then the next night, Primetime did one on housing. So that could be something we see during this campaign as well. We could have particular debates, TV debates on particular issues.
Yeah. And I'm just looking at the map here as well, David, because I think and of course that just takes us to literally halfway through the campaign as well, and there's so much more to happen thereafter. And I think the last time we were, we had first TV debate, special debates, 7-way debates, 3-way debates. We were almost debated out, I think, by the end of it in terms of how many debates there were.
Yes, there was kind of a cadence of debates, right? The first one had just Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael leaders, so that was Leo Varadkar and Micheál Martin. Then you ended up with 2 7-ways, which had a wider set of parties. But what happened during this time, and this is with kind of a week or two to go, Sinn Féin started to kick up a fuss about not being scheduled to be on the main final week debate, which was going to be again between the 2 main leaders. But Mary Lou McDonald said, hang on a minute, guys. These 2 parties are the same. They've done confidence and supply. Sinn Féin is the alternative. We want on that TV debate. So 4 days from the vote, Mary Lou McDonald gets on that debate stage, and suddenly the optics and the narrative completely changed.
Mm-hmm.
The election is no longer that old Fine Gael Fianna Fáil contest. Now Sinn Féin are in the mix.
Yeah.
And what happens on polling day, Sinn Féin end up with the highest number of votes and are tied high for the number of seats, and they are perceived to have won the election.
Yeah.
So the cadence, the sequence of how that election went worked just incredibly in Sinn Féin's favour and incredibly against the what are now the government parties.
And it goes to show you how kind of volatile things were, because even Sinn Féin were cut off in terms of how well they were supported, because they didn't run enough candidates the last election. So they actually weren't, despite winning 24.5% of the popular vote, they got, the guts of 50,000 more votes than Fianna Fáil. They actually didn't capitalize on their seat chances, and actually now going into this election, given the huge decline in their support levels from where they once were, they actually might lose seats potentially, which is or it certainly just gain a select few. But I think it shows you that it's quite volatile right now, and
it is.
If I go way back, David, because I think the key thing from this is around how events during an election can severely change them. And of course, if you go back to the 2011 presidential campaign, I recall Sean Gallagher at the time, who was running away with the campaign into the final week. He appeared on a debate, and of course, he mentioned brown envelope, and that was his campaign toast.
Yeah. So these things can turn, just in the space of one debate, or they can turn gradually and quite persistently over the 4 or 5 weeks. I mean, that 2020 example is very much that. It just, everything that could have gone wrong for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil very much did. I think this could be a total narrative in reverse this time, that kind of 6-7 weeks out, we're seeing everything that could possibly go wrong for Sinn Féin happening. That could persist right throughout to polling day. But the thing that I'll be looking out for is a long-standing theory I've had, which is that the Irish system kind of goes Dutch. And it's that you end up with no one party with more than 20-25% of the vote. You have quite a spread amongst a large number of parties, and you have multi-party coalitions become much more common. Now, weirdly, Ireland's one result might be an anomaly in that the Sinn Féin vote might get split across Labour, Soc Dems, a whole bunch of others, but Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil will be strong enough to be able to lead a coalition on their own with a number of independents. That seems to be kind of still the almost the base case for this one.
So we think the Green Party may not be in the next one?
I'd imagine not. Yeah, I think it'll be the preference of the 2 main parties not to talk to the Greens first, even though they have been, they know how to talk to the Greens. But I think the Greens will come back a bit bruised. I think they're already talking about, how they can transfer more to Labour and Soc Dems as opposed to the parties that they just worked with, which is going to be a hard tightrope for them to walk. And I think Fine Gael Fianna Fáil will find much more compromise being easier with the independents, because the Greens fought hard in the last negotiations. They got big policy concessions
They
on things
did.
like transport and climate. And if the two main parties want to come along and not have to make as many compromises, talking to the independents first is probably the first thing that they'll do, as opposed to talk to Greens.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating stuff, David. So I think there's a lot to happen in the next in the next week or so. We'll see if, in terms of when a date gets clarified. I know November 29th is what people are earmarking, but of course all that depends on how the finance bill passes through both the Dáil and Seanad over the coming 2 weeks.
Yeah, my bet is that's going to breeze through, because Dale, all the TDs are back in their constituencies.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, the campaign started. We both know this from some of the stuff that we're seeing from all parties is that the campaign has started. The posters are printed. So I mean, effectively, and like I think we can say that the campaign hasn't started and there's still lots to happen. It's already started and people on the ground.
Yeah. It'll be 3 or 4 weeks by definite by legal standpoint with posters up, but the gun has kind of been called already.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating, David. We're out of time, so I think lots to unfold over the next week, and until then, we'll leave it there. So thanks again to everyone for watching and listening, and see you again next week.